It's a great pleasure to be here, and a privilege to be able to share with you what we know, or at least some of what we know about self-neglect, in a series of bite-sized sessions. We do have a second go at this because you'll see we're on the programme a little bit later. So a little bit later we'll share some more of what we know. But to start off, we just want to make some introductory comments, and we will share this presentation between us. So just to set out some definitions, really, down at the bottom there on the screen, you'll see the closest that we have to a standard definition of self-neglect in English. It's a very broad definition. It covers a wide range of behaviour, neglecting to care for personal hygiene, health, surroundings, and includes behaviour such as hoarding. The inclusion of hoarding, I think, is significant. It's in that definition appears in the statutory guidance, and it builds on research that Vida's already mentioned that we conducted for the Department of Health in the years that the preparations were taking place for development of the Care Act, its guidance and implementation. So really what we mean when we talk about self-neglect, we mean three key elements: neglect of self-care, so personal hygiene, health, just general safety, or neglect of the domestic environment through squalor, through infestation, and often through hoarding. But those are things that many of us do to some degree at various points in our lives. Here, what we're talking about is where there is danger to health, safety and well-being as a result of that self-neglect. And that, of course, is often associated with refusal of services that would mitigate that risk of harm. So it's a broad definition, but there are some key components to it. We see commonly coming through in Safeguarding Adults reviews risks relating to a whole host of things, and on the slide here what we've captured are just examples really. There is as much risk as indeed there are people who are engaging in self-neglect, and often the risk picture takes some time to emerge, and it's a little bit sometimes like peeling back the layers of an onion to identify what the most immediate risks are, what the most serious risks are, but also what some of the underlying risks are. In terms of what we know about prevalence, there are varying estimates of prevalence, partly because the definition is so wide, but there are some commonalities across age. It affects people of all ages, it affects people of all socioeconomic groupings, it affects people across the kind of gender spectrum. Men and women are particularly kind of evenly balanced really in terms of forms of self-neglect. We know relatively little about racial profiles. That's because we're not collecting the right kind of information, but we do know that there are some common, from Safeguarding Adults reviews, some common features of the situations that people of different racial groups face in relation to their self-neglect. Important to note that in England, self-neglect constitutes currently 8% of completed Section 42 inquiries, but it constitutes 45% of Safeguarding Adults reviews, and that figure comes from the National Analysis of Safeguarding Adults reviews that I'm going to tell you a little bit about in just a moment. So what do we know about this newly included form of abuse and neglect, newly included within adult safeguarding? Well, we do have learning from Safeguarding Adults reviews, and we're able to critically reflect on our own personal experience. We do have some research evidence, both about things that go wrong and also things that go right, and that is added to by the voices of lived experience, and we hope to showcase some, if not all, of those sources of evidence in this and our subsequent presentation. So just to flag up where the research evidence comes from, back in 2010 we started to do the work for the Department of Health, both on looking at self-neglect, what was known and published about it, but also what was known about how Safeguarding Adults boards were operating and what was the relationship between self-neglect and adult safeguarding. We undertook a series of focus groups with practitioners to identify what workforce development needs might be. We then did another piece of work for the Department of Health, looking at how positive outcomes were being achieved, and that's given us as part of that we interviewed 29 people with lived experience of self-neglect, and we use those findings in our research in our presentation today. Since 2014, in fact, since before 2014, we've been tracking the outcomes of serious cases, serious case reviews, and then subsequently, of course, since the Care Act, Safeguarding Adults reviews. And you may be surprised to know that there are now well over 400 reviews of serious cases that feature self-neglect, and those are just the ones that we know about. But then the national analysis of SARS that Michael and I, along with colleagues from Research in Practice, led in 2020, we looked at 231 reviews published or completed across that 2-year period, 45% of which involved self-neglect. So that gives us a sense really of just how challenging self-neglect is within the safeguarding sector. So what the Safeguarding Adults reviews tell us, of course, is what goes wrong. And for the rest of this short input, I'm going to hand over to Michael, who's going to run through what goes wrong and speculate about what might be the challenges to practice.
So good afternoon, everybody. Great to see so many people in the webinar and this initiative in the Northeast. So as Suzy said, we're going to focus in the first presentation more on what Safeguarding Adult reviews tell us about what goes wrong, and we will translate that into an evidence base for best practice, which we will detail in the second presentation that we make a little later on today. So here you can see a wide range of findings, some of which relate to direct practice with individuals and the degree to which making safeguarding personal is or is not embedded in practice. Some of the findings relate to the team around the person, how organisations work collaboratively together and collaboratively with the individual about whom there are concerns. Some of the findings relate to how organisations support practitioners and operational managers to get close to the evidence base, and then there are some findings also in relation to the governance responsibilities of Safeguarding Adult boards. Recurrent findings in relation to the lack of or shortcomings in professional curiosity, concerned curiosity, a failure to explore the backstory behind how an individual presents, shortcomings in relation to assessments of risk and mental capacity, mental health, care and support, and indeed carer assessments. And then moving through direct practice to the team around the person, shortcomings in terms of information sharing, in how organisations communicate with each other, shortcomings in relation to lead agency and key worker in complex and challenging cases, and shortcomings in relation to an understanding of the range of legal rules that might have a contribution to make, and either failing to refer safeguarding concerns or shortcomings in how the local authority responds to the adult safeguarding concerns that are referred under Section 42 of the Care Act. So those are some repetitive findings in Safeguarding Adult reviews, and because the findings are repetitive, both within an individual SAB area or across regions and indeed nationally, we need to look systemically across a wide range of domains, 5 domains here, and to identify where the enablers for best practice are and where the obstacles or barriers are. And it may be that however enabling and effective direct practice with the individual might be, that the obstacles or barriers that frustrate best practice reside in other parts of the whole system. So when we get to the second presentation, you will see that there is an evidence base across the domains that we have just pictured for you in the preceding slide. And in recognition of the fact that we need a whole system understanding of where the obstacles or barriers are. Here you have got a slide which captures the frequent finding that individuals might be reluctant to engage, or individuals might be unable to engage because of the way services are organised and the expectations that services hold of individuals who self-neglect. Coming up against organisational pressures, financial austerity, increasing workloads, increasing demands through the front door, and we know that there have been increased pressures on organisations as a result of the pandemic, and that includes increasing numbers of self-neglect cases being referred through to local authorities. And it's not surprising, although it's disappointing, that sometimes there is insufficient outreach towards individuals who are self-neglecting because of an assumed unwillingness on their part to engage, and organisations focusing more on those individuals who for organisations are proving easier to reach. We also know that a repetitive finding is assumptions that practitioners and services make. And one very common assumption that is reported in safeguarding adult reviews is the assumption of lifestyle choice. That individuals could stop drinking or misusing other substances if they chose to. Whereas there is insufficient recognition that how an individual presents on the 22nd of November 2022 will be profoundly influenced by adverse experiences, by traumas, by disabilities, by illnesses that actually may explain why an individual is presenting in the way that they are. And there are some quotations here from the service users that we interviewed as part of the research for the Department of Health that begin to unpick and unpack this notion of lifestyle choice. So if there is at least one take-home message from today, it is that we should always question our own assumptions and other people's assumptions about lifestyle choice. What you will see when you are able to look at the presentation in its entirety is that we have given some examples of safeguarding adult reviews and reviews done prior to the implementation of the Care Act that illustrates some of the repetitive findings that have been reported, and you can read those human stories for further take-home messages. So that concludes the first of our two presentations, and we will translate the shortcomings into a positive evidence base for practice when we return a little later in the webinar.